speaking to a police convention where he basically called for stop and frisk to become national policy.
Well, we've seen that policy.
Actually, hold tight 1 second, Michael. I think we have audio. Go ahead.
And I have directed the Attorney General's office to immediately go to the great city of Chicago to help straighten out the terrible shooting wave. Want to straighten it out fast. There's no reason for what's going on there. I've told them to work with local authorities to try to change the terrible deal the city of Chicago entered into with ACLU, which ties law enforcement's hands, and to strongly consider stop and frisk. It works, and it was meant for problems like Chicago. It was meant for it. Stop and frisk. And Rudy Giuliani, when he was mayor of New York City, had a very strong program of stop and frisk, and it went from an unacceptably dangerous city to one of the safest cities in the country, and I think the safest big city in the country. So it works. Got to be properly applied, but stop and frisk works. The crime spree is a terrible blight on that city, and we'll do everything possible to get it done. I know the law enforcement people in Chicago, and I know how good they are. They could solve the problem if they were simply allowed to do their job and do their job properly, and that's what they want to do. So, Chicago, we're going to start working with you as of today.
Okay, folks, Donald Trump just lied in that particular speech. Facts are stop and frisk in New York was deemed to be racist. 96% of the people who were stopped in stop and frisk were never even charged with a crime. Guess what? The police and all the people who were shouting, oh my God, this is somehow going to cause a dramatic rise in crime, flat out lied. There was no increase in crime in New York by getting rid of stop and frisk. Michael, this is a president who is advocating a racist policy. They're not stopping and frisking white folks on Wall Street to see if they're carrying cocaine or other drugs. What they're doing is they're stopping and frisking black and brown people. This is Donald Trump advocating on behalf what is an undeniable racist policy. The same thing Mike Bloomberg did, and then he was all the big boogeyman. And a year after stop and frisk ended, they had no evidence that it increased crime.
You know, you use that word that it's not debatable about this particular policy. Everybody knows it's about getting black and brown folks in the criminal justice system. You're right. They're not on Wall Street. They're on Central Park West. The problem that you'll hear a lot of folks talking about, though, Roland, and I know you hear it all over the country, is then people say, how did this guy even get elected? You know how he got elected? Because a lot of people said, you know what? I don't like Hillary. For whatever reason, they didn't like her, and they stayed at home. A vote, when you stayed at home, that was a vote for Donald Trump. So now I hope people understand that elections have consequences. You can't just sit at home, hope for the best. You need to get out. If there's a line, stand in it. If it's raining, get an umbrella. If your kid needs a babysitter, find one. Either way, you need to vote in November.
Avis, again, to stand in front of police, this is a president who's afraid to come talk to the NAACP, afraid to come to the National Urban League, afraid to go to the National Action Network, afraid to come before the NAACP Legal Defense Fund or the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. He has yet to sit down with civil rights organizations as a group. He is advocating an absolutely racist policy that simply isn't true. And what he's doing is he's letting these Chicago cops off the hook who are still mad that Jason Van Dyke was prosecuted in the killing of Laquan McDonald. They have purposely slowed down police activity there because they basically want to say to the city, if you dare hold any one of us accountable, we're going to shut this whole thing down and let mayhem just happen all over the streets of Chicago.
Absolutely. And we know that was the same tactic that Baltimore police used as well after the murder of Freddie Gray. But here's the larger point I want to make here. Not only is that policy racist, it was also found to be unconstitutional. And this is supposed to be someone who is supposed to be protecting, defending sort of the stalwart of the Constitution. Instead, he is who he always is. He's a liar, he's a thug, he's a rogue, okay? This is absolutely wrong. As you mentioned, getting rid of it did not lead to a spike in crime. And I just want to echo the point that was just made. The reality is that this was completely predictable. He campaigned on a platform of law and order. And as African Americans in our history in this country, we know exactly what that appeals to. We know exactly what that's referring to. That's referring to using very violent actions against our community in particular through the guise of increased police presence and force and power. And now he is about to implement his campaign promise as it relates to that. And finally, I would just say that I agree. Unfortunately, when we don't show up as we should at the polls and instead fall for these okey-doke tactics of these protest votes or voting for people who don't have a chance in hell of winning, is really what I wanted to say, this is what we end up with. And so we need to definitely make sure that we can learn from this mistake and make sure that we do not replicate it in the future.
Eugene.
Man, look, this guy is trash. And every single day he reminds us that he is trash. With trash policies, with trash people around him. I think it's interesting that, he would, let's take a step back. This is the same guy who a year ago around this time stood in front of the NYPD and said, hey, I hate that you guys, take care when you're putting people in cars when you arrest them. Why don't you just, go ahead and let their head hit against the ceiling of the car. This is the same guy, he brings up Rudy Giuliani. It's the same guy that flirted with Rudy while he's in drag. This is the same guy. He's told us, it's the same guy who boosts, folk like Dan Bongino and Sheriff Clark. We know, he's trash. We know his policies are trash. The thing is this, we're going to talk about, pivot this to voting, November is 29 days away. Election day is 29 days away. On that ballot, you're going to have federal races, but you're also going to have state races. You're going to have a lot of seats on the ballot, a lot of offices on the ballot that's going to determine who your county sheriff is, who your county state attorney is and DA is, who's going to hire the chief of police that's going to set policies for the police department. If I'm in Chicago or any other major city, that's a major issue for me. Baltimore 2020, Mayor Pugh's going to have to deal with, the situation of the Baltimore police. I hear, essentially, going Conor McGregor on people. Stop and frisk is a failed policy. It's an unconstitutional policy, and we experienced arrest on site with Martin O'Malley in Baltimore, 10, 15 years ago. But November 2018, the defining issue needs to be who's going to hire a police chief, what the policies are going to be, and give a middle finger to the president's trash policies with the trash people that he surrounded himself with.